Welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, July 20th. Brought to you by Vunibaka.com, a new residential and surf-based resort in the island of Fiji. First up, let's take a look at significant wave heights in the North Pacific Ocean. Currently, no activity going on other than tropical-related storm, actually a typhoon, off of the northern Philippines, tracking to the north. Even no wind swell off northern California. A rather rare occurrence, but not that unusual for this time of year. Put this into motion a couple frames at a time. Tropical system supposed to move in over northern Taiwan late Tuesday into early Wednesday. And things continue to get even more quiet, especially in the Gulf of Alaska. High pressure taking over this area is the expected result. A little bit of fetch starts to build off the northern California coast on Thursday night. Local wind swell, but nothing too exciting. At least there's that in the forecast. And then another tropical system perhaps a week out forming. Again, same region. This will be I believe the third, if not the fourth system in that area, if it happens. And another tropical system, would never believe either one of these, though, really, a week out in advance per any of the models. But at least it gives you a hint of what's to come. Also take a look at wind speeds and surface pressure. Notice high pressure currently set up north of Hawaii, 128 millibars, but pulled away from the U.S. West Coast. No real gradient to speak of. That is, no north winds, and therefore no north wind swell along the California coast, but a bit of local easterly fetch associated with what was a tropical system that was out in this region that has since dissipated. Still, remnant low pressure in conjunction with the high pressure to the north forms a bit of a gradient. North winds 15-20 knots, a little bit of wind swell along east-facing shores there. And as we put this into motion, that's really the only activity going on of any interest in our forecast area. This continues Monday, Tuesday into Wednesday. And again, notice just nothing off the coast here. High pressure pretty much has the North Pacific lockdown, but wind swell continues for the east shores of the Hawaiian Islands. And then starting sometime on Wednesday, the high pressure starts to finally start ridging into the U.S. West Coast. Get a little bit of a gradient starting to form down near Point Conception. That works its way north. And then we're supposed to have 25-knot winds off of Cape Mendocino by about sometime later on Thursday. Notice the fetch here relative to Hawaii starts to fade out, but then we'll start getting wind swell relative to the California coast. That continues into the weekend, so maybe a little something rideable north of Point Conception. The trade wind swell starts fading out relative to the Hawaiian Islands, but notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a string of supposed tropical systems are supposed to develop in this region, which would be nice if it happened. Something to monitor. I would never believe the GFS model this far in advance. Not more than a day or two on tropical systems, but it looks pretty good in that regards. Otherwise, high pressure pretty much locks down the Gulf of Alaska. Not unusual for this time of year, and north wind swell again continues through the weekend into the early part of the following week, and more wind swell for the Hawaiian Islands, but that's about it. Next, we take a look at the South Pacific. Not a whole lot going on here as well. Little area of 26-foot seas, barely in the Southern California swell window. Another little patch of 22-foot seas under New Zealand, but relative to the U.S. West Coast and Hawaii, too far away to generate any meaningful swell. And if anything, just not a whole lot going on. But let's go take a look at the chart, see what's coming up. First up, let's take a look at jet stream level winds. These are winds up above 30,000 feet. These winds help direct the track of storms when they form, and also help support the formation of storms and or gales. Right now we have basically a split zonal flow. Southern branch of the jet stream pretty much tracking about the 63-degree track south the whole way across the Pacific Ocean. The northern branch much less influential in terms of winter storm developments in the southern hemisphere. No real troughs. It's just this flat flow. and split, not offering any real support for gale development. Let's put it into motion and see what happens. As we roll out into Tuesday, we notice a little bit of a bulge here starting to push north under New Zealand, trying to perhaps support the formation of a gale. These winds are in the 110 knot range, not particularly strong and not pushing very hard to the north, but at least it's a little bit of hope. Notice also the jet is actually pushing down into Antarctica in the east. That's a strong ridge. That'll shut down any gale development in this region of the Pacific Ocean. So the only hope by about Wednesday is this area under New Zealand. We'll put this into motion. There's this continued troughing kind of pattern forecast for this area. Notice winds start building to 120 plus knots. 130, the trough sort of moves a little bit further east, so if there were any gale or low pressure development, it would be in this region. The big ridge continues on Saturday in the southeast Pacific when we roll this out, and that trough pattern just continues, which is kind of a good sign, but not particularly strong. It makes its way across to about almost the east, southeast Pacific, and yet another ridge starts building under New Zealand. So there's not a whole lot suggestive of gale development based on the jet stream level charts. Let's go take a look down at the surface. Next, we'll take a look here. Surface level wind, surface level pressure. It is wind on the surface of the ocean that generates seas. Those seas, when they radiate away from the fetch area or where the wind is, turns into swell, and swell is, of course, what generates surf. Right now, a little bit of a fetch here in the far southeast Pacific. What is that? 40 knot winds, but all aimed due east, mainly at Chile. Little odds of any of that radiating up into California. A broader low pressure system here with only 30 knot fetch, and all of it's pretty much impacting New Zealand, not doing a whole lot for storm or sea production in this area, and of course the tropical system off the Philippines. Let's put this into motion, see how it plays out. As we roll into time here, again, this low pressure system we're into Monday continues to generate. This low here moves out of the picture, and the tropical system is bound for Taiwan. We're into Tuesday. Tropical system hits Taiwan. Again, signs of low pressure, but no real fetch. I mean, only a little patch of 35 knot winds. We really need 45 knot winds to start making any serious swell production. We have 40 knot winds by Tuesday night under New Zealand, but even those fade off pretty quick. And you just have this sort of meandering low pressure pattern, but nothing really organized, nothing to really push any water at all. It all kind of suggests something could happen, but there's just really nothing going on. And then high pressure sets up over New Zealand by Sunday. We're a week out, and that's pretty much the end of it. We have this bit of a low here. There's a dot, one Gribbs square of 45 knot winds. And at 180 hours out, none of it's believable. And then here again is this the tropical systems we referred to. 1, 2, maybe a wave there, another one here, and fetch moving into the Hawaiian Islands up north. So at this point, not a whole lot is indicated on the charts for the next week. Let's go take a look at the long-term projections. So we're continuing to monitor what is supposed to be the development of El Nino. First off, we'll take a look at the Southern Oscillation Index, the difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. If El Nino were in play, you would expect to see negative numbers here in the daily Southern Oscillation Index. We don't see them. There's been a couple of spurts of negative numbers here and there, somewhat attributable to a very weak active phase of the MJO that's currently occurring. If we actually look, the 30-day running average is somewhat negative, minus 5.76, which is a good sign. This needs to continue for a good couple of months before one would say, hey, these numbers are being influenced by El Nino. And the 9-day average, as you can see, is 1.45, so just about neutral. So overall, no signs of El Nino, no real signs of even the active phase of the MJO, but the 30-day average is looking somewhat encouraging. Next up, let's take a look at wind anomalies. These are wind differences from normal for this time of year, for this part of the equatorial Pacific. We're north of Australia, Philippines, tropical system here. A little bit of, one could almost say, westerly anomalies, but not really. Pretty much a neutral pattern. Little bit of a hint of westerly anomalies here as we approach the dateline. Dead neutral on the dateline. Weak easterly anomalies as we move past the dateline. And then we get south of Hawaii, there's Hawaii there, weak easterly anomalies, and then pretty much a neutral pattern. So no suggestion of the active phase of the MJO, really. You'd see westerly anomalies if that were the case. Easterly anomalies, if anything, suggest the inactive phase, but these could just as easily be transitory as well. Next we go a week out. The good news here is there's some signs of weak westerly anomalies starting to develop near the dateline. A little bit of easterly anomalies here north of Australia, and then we continue on east. Westerly anomalies almost to Hawaii, and these are very weak, and then just a neutral pattern. So in all, it looks like pretty much more of the same, just nothing really suggestive of the MJO, nothing really suggestive of El Nino, and certainly nothing to support Kelvin wave development of any magnitude. Next, we'll take a look at the outgoing long-wave radiation forecasts. These could loosely be correlated to the inactive and active phase of the MJO. Blues are, of course, the active phase, and one would hope for westerly anomalies. This per the statistic model, which suggests that whatever active phase is currently in place is supposed to fade out about a week out, and then we just go into this neutral pattern, if anything, starting to trend a little bit towards the inactive phase. But the dynamic model is a little bit more encouraging and actually has been working a bit better when we're in this sort of a semi-El Nino state, suggesting the active phase to hold a little bit stronger and a little bit longer with no signs of the inactive phase, but if anything, sort of just more going towards a neutral pattern. Either way, this is good. There's no hint of the inactive phase, and that's what we want to see. And if El Nino were actually in play, you'd expect the MJO to all but dissipate, and that's exactly what we're seeing here, is a very weak MJO signal, which has been the case all year long, which suggests that somewhere in the atmosphere at some level there is some sort of an El Nino-like pattern trying to take root. And if that were to happen, it should be happening in the August to September time frame. So we're right on the cusp here. And of course, the long-term upper-level model, this is showing propensity for precipitation or the ability to enhance precipitation. Greens are the enhancement phase, roughly the active phase of the MJO. Yellows, oranges, the inactive phase. Currently, this pretty much sums it up, and this is for over a 40-day period, so it's kind of a stretch as far as the model goes. But right now, kind of a neutral pattern bias towards the active phase. When we get into August, it's supposed to go dead neutral. This suggests by the end of August a pretty robust inactive phase, but this model has given us lots of false worries in the past, and basically I don't hold any credence in what this suggests. We suspect, again, it's just going to be more of the same, a very weak tendency one way or the other, but nothing really manifesting in terms of any strength or magnitude. Next, we look at sea surface temperature anomalies. This is basically the ground truth of the status of El Nino. Without warm water in this region on the equator from the Galapagos and radiating west from there, you will not have El Nino. Currently, pretty warm anomalies continue in the Galapagos, Ecuador area. Nothing particularly strong given the time of year, but you know, it gives us signs. Actually, there's a bit of a troubling pattern developing here. There's these little patches of cooler anomalies starting to show up. Most of the warm water is confined from 120 eastward, and this is the Nino 1.2 region. When the meteorologists look for the formation of El Nino, they don't consider this area at all. They're really looking for warming a couple of degrees either side of the equator from here out to the dateline, and clearly that is not the case. It's dead neutral, and if anything, getting more neutral over time. So to put things in perspective, we're back to April. We're going to run this sort of a time lapse so you can see what's going on. There was this consistent week, half a degree warming that was going on here. At this time in April, there was strong westerly anomalies in this region. Notice there was a lot of warm surface water here. Those westerly anomalies, if they blow hard enough and long enough, create a Kelvin wave. That is a pocket of warm anomalies that travel under the equator and then eventually impact this region here. It takes about 3 months for them to get here, and then they start gurgling up. Those westerly anomalies over here started January, February, March time frame. Let's put this into motion so you can sort of see what happens. Notice water starts warming in the May time frame as the very leading edge of the Kelvin wave generated in the winter starts impacting the Galapagos area. Not particularly strong warming, but also notice it starts advecting off and starts moving in here into the Nino 3.4 region. As we get into later May, the temperatures start warming more, looking a little bit more interesting, though not as warm as one would expect given the magnitude of the Kelvin wave. And then you're into late June, and it looks like this thing has about peaked out, and we'll sort of go back and forth. Notice all of a sudden there's a little cooler pocket showing up here. Go back. Solid. This is probably about the peak, somewhere around 623, and then all of a sudden this cool pocket starts showing up. You don't see as much warming out in here anymore. And then we start getting in July. It sort of fluctuates. It sort of fills in a little more again, and then it starts breaking up. Notice there's actually cooler anomalies there, and I think there's one more in here, right? So, and then you get these cool anomalies here, and I'll go back just a couple here. You can sort of see. We'll do there. The peak was somewhere in this time frame, from 626 to maybe 7.3, and then it's kind of been on the decline since then. Not surprising, though, and when we get into the subsurface data, you'll see why. But that is not necessarily bad news. Here's the zoomed-in view, high-res sea surface temperature anomaly data for the Galapagos and the Ecuador area. The extent of the really warm waters is 2.25 to 4 degree anomalies is about the same as last week. It's good, but it's not great. One thing that is interesting, 4 degree anomalies right here. There was a fairly good number of small pockets of plus 4 degree anomalies a couple weeks back. They've all disappeared, but now another one's starting to gurgle up here. And at one point there was actually a cool flow developing off here, but that's all since filled in. So for now, the pool looks stable. It could sure use some reinforcements, but for now, it looks stable. Another thing that we're going to look at here, sort of jumping back, wind anomalies again. Notice we're a little bit north of the equator here, and this is just July 16th, but there has been sort of a westerly wind pulse developing north of the equator, a little bit too far north, but generally in what we would call the Kelvin wave generation area. So that's a good sign. There appears to be something that's trying to do the right thing, and this is through the 18th of July. This chart updates daily, and it goes back a couple of days. It starts a couple of days back. So we're kind of watching to see whether a new Kelvin wave, in fact, is developing. And to go with that, here is sea surface temperatures, but it is also wind deviations from normal in the West Pacific. And notice there's a little bit of a hint of westerly anomalies going on here back around 160 east. Not particularly strong, but this has sort of been the pattern since about the end of June. Is just this persistent kind of bleed of weak westerly anomalies, which is way better than easterly anomalies or way better than just nothing at all. And this is in the right region, so this would suggest that some sort of a weak Kelvin wave would be forming. So finally, we take a look at the subsurface profile. This is temperature deviations from normal. This is the far West Pacific. Kelvin wave generation area would be like right in here. This is the East Pacific. The Galapagos would be right here. And notice here is the Kelvin wave that was generated earlier this year. At one point, water temperatures here were pushing about 5.5 degrees above normal, and that was confirmed by this string of sensors here attached to a buoy's anchor line in the East Pacific. So that is good, valid data. Temperatures still 3, maybe 3¼ degrees, and covering a fairly good area. But this Kelvin wave is definitely on its last legs. Not nearly as impressive as it was a month or two ago, but still, this warm water, which was originally over here, migrated the entire width of the Pacific, is bleeding up to or gurgling up to the surface, and that is what is feeding that warm pool off of the Galapagos and Ecuador, and that is to continue for at least a month or so. The other note here is a small pocket of 1 degree anomalies. It's actually a little bit better defined than it was a week or two ago. And the thought is the weak westerly anomalies in this region are in fact trying to get another Kelvin wave going. Not a strong one, not a warm one, and it's going to take 2.5 months to make it the entire way across here. The question is, or the thought is, this Kelvin wave will probably be dissipated by then. So this one won't be able to come and just like add more reinforcements. It's going to have to start from zero. And in fact, perhaps the warm waters that are already off on the surface at the Galapagos could be well dissipated by the time this Kelvin wave reaches into the East Pacific. So just a theory, something to monitor, but at least there is a little hope of some reinforcements going on here in the West Pacific. Here's another view of the same thing. This is basically a different model running it. This is a little bit older data. It's from the 12th of July, but it still shows the same sort of thing. Weak pool of the previous Kelvin wave in the East Pacific. New Kelvin wave trying to develop, extremely weak. Not a whole lot to get too excited about, but certainly not La Nina. And again, satellite data kind of showing the same picture. Sea surface height deviations from normal. Positive numbers suggest warm water at depth. Notice there's nothing here in the Galapagos region, suggesting the Kelvin wave is all but dissipated. This actually makes it look worse than it really is. The other interesting thing, though, is this is showing a larger extent of warm water in this portion of the West Pacific than what the subsurface data suggest, which could be good news. We would want to see this continue to build, these numbers build above 5 centimeters in this area to get a decent or a healthy Kelvin wave going. And now we'll take a look, sea surface temperature anomaly forecast from the CFS version 2 model for the Nino 3.4 region. These are monthly anomalies. And so it's actually a little bit of an upgrade from what we were seeing a week or two ago. It's now showing we're supposed to cross the 1 degree threshold now in the September time frame. Previously was showing it in October. And temperatures are up. At one point it was down to like 1.15 degrees. Now we're up to about 1.35 or almost 1.4 degrees above normal, which would be a respectable El Nino on the par with 2009-2010 El Nino. So something to monitor. I'm not sure what is driving this increased temperature forecast. Perhaps the sense that the Kelvin wave is, or that a Kelvin wave is developing, or that the existing Kelvin wave will last a little bit longer under the Galapagos. Hard to say, but a little bit of encouraging news. Not sure how much anyone should believe any of this. What really matters is the ground truth of what's happening now, and the projections in the future, though they're fun to watch, exciting, there's a pretty low level of confidence in most of these models. So to wrap things up for this week, nothing but wind swell for Northern California, not till late in the work week for the weekend. For Hawaii, east wind swell in the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday time frame. Otherwise, no southern hemi swell is in the water. None is expected to be generated, so it's pretty much a slack period of time. But you know what? That's not that unusual for the time of year. August is typically the slowest month of the year as we start the transition from summer into fall. The good bit of news is there's a fair amount of tropical activity going on in the West Pacific. One would expect to see that if there was El Nino in play, that those tropical systems would start recurving. Instead of impacting Japan and Taiwan, they'd actually sort of miss the coast, get caught by the jet stream, and track towards the Gulf of Alaska. But we're still early in the game for that. You wouldn't start seeing any of that till probably the mid-August time frame at the earliest. Otherwise, El Nino appears to try to be limping along, not particularly strong, nowhere near a super El Nino status. At this point in time, it could go either way. It could be very weak, it could completely peter out and there'd be nothing, or it could sort of turn into a moderate El Nino. So it's hard to say. The fall transition time frame is when we'll have a much better handle on things, say once we get into September or so. And then we should see some real westerly wind bursts. We should see Kelvin wave formation. If that happens, then we know we're on track. But if that doesn't happen and it just all starts fizzling out, then maybe we're just in for a neutral year or a neutral, slightly warm biased. But you know what? That's better than the past couple of years we've had. So for now, that's sort of the way it looks. And again, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Vunabaca.com, for bringing you this surf forecast. Check them out at Vunabaca.com, the new surf and water-based residential community in the island of Fiji. Thank you. We'll do this again next week, same time, same channel. Thanks.